Episode 14. What is retro to you, me, everyone else? Today on Press B to Cancel.
Press B to cancel.
This week on Press B to Cancel, we are talking about retro. What does it mean to you? What qualifies as retro? There's a lot of personal preference on this topic, and you can kind of hardline it if you want, but really there's always going to be a little bit of wiggle room from person to person, no matter how close you might be. Oh, you know what? We didn't do the go around the table and meet everybody. Let's start with that. All right, so I am Werewolf. And I am joined with Guy Prime.
Oh, sorry. A little bit of a delay here. I'm having some technical limitations. Hey, everybody. How we doing?
And there's Sick Jake.
Hey, everybody. As always, happy to be here.
And Pulse 109.
YOLO.
And somewhere in here there's a secret Craig, but we don't talk about him.
He's listening.
Anyway, back to the topic at hand. You know what? Let's start with Pulse.
That's
what
me.
qualifies as retro to you?
I think age is the biggest thing. It's got to have it's hard. Oh, it's just so subjective for me. even though I can look at a game, do I consider that retro? Yes, no. I think it's two things. It's got to be the age of it and nostalgia. There has to be a nostalgia thing, whether it's legitimate, I played it as a kid, or maybe it's something
It just takes you back to that feeling of being a kid?
Yeah, so when I'm playing an indie game that's 2D, and I'm okay, this feels retro.
Savage?
Like Savage, the Shard of Ghosten? Yes, exactly. Get out of my head. But it comes down to those two main things, and it's usually an age thing, and the nostalgia, I think, is just kind of a symptom of its age.
See, to me, it's easy to just be okay, if it looks like an NES or Super Nintendo game, it still qualifies as retro, Pixel art, limited color palette, that sort of thing. Like Shovel Knight. It almost qualifies as retro, even though it's a game that's younger than my son, And he's 5. So it's really not retro, but the play style very much was meant to emulate, the old NES Capcom games, DuckTales, Mega Man, that sort of thing. And then, it gets a little trickier the more, the fewer technical limitations the platform had. So once you start hitting PlayStation, a lot of people will still think, yeah, it's retro. Once you get to PS2, that's kind of where the lines start to blur a little bit between larger groups of people, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair.
Beyond that, it starts getting trickier and trickier. How about you, GP? What do you qualify as retro?
I'm kind of with Pulse. I think there's a couple of different aspects or categories that you have to look at. Is it legitimately an aged video game, or is it a callback to the older days where comparatively the systems would have, again, various technical limitations compared to what the newer gen things have? But to his point about nostalgia, let's make a comparison to clothes. You've got people, let's say back in the 70s, who went to a Pink Floyd show and bought merch there, like a t-shirt. Okay, fast forward to 2019, you've got the 17-year-old kid shopping at Hot Topic buying a Pink Floyd shirt. Is the new Pink Floyd shirt that was made within the past 12 to 13 months, is that retro even though it's brand spanking new, or is it just because it's a callback to the retro days? You know what I mean? So we talk about those newer games that are made in the old style, and it's, I don't know. I've been on stream and people talking about this, and honest to God, I don't have a strict definition. I know a lot of people are 2 generations or older, or 12 fucking years, and I'm I don't, to me, it's not that hard of a line. So yeah, I'm kind of fluid with my definition there. I have no answers. I just like to talk.
What you just brought up actually brings into question whether even reproductions can be classified as retro,
Right. And again, I think there's a bit of a distinction there. This is actually retro or this is in the old style. And I think those are two separate categories that belong under the same umbrella, but they are, to me, distinctly different. Savage is a great example of that. That game is a month and a half, 2 months old, and I love it because it feels like much older than that. It's not 1987. It's not 1993. It's 2019, calling back to that.
A friend of mine, when I showed it to him, he wants to wait until the game is out of early access just because he's the kind of guy who will play a game until he's done everything in it. So he doesn't want to touch it while you can't do everything. But he saw the trailer and he was like, oh my God, that looks like the most advanced Super Nintendo game ever.
Right.
And he was so hyped for it when he saw it. I was going to say, I think that makes it kind of qualify under retro when you're comparing it to a Super Nintendo game and that era so easily.
How about for like Commodore 64, where they actually have people making games for the C64 where they're carts, like the homebrew games and stuff like that? Would you consider that retro?
You know what? Seeing as it requires a Commodore 64, I probably would. Can we get Jake's perspective here on this? What do you think? What qualifies as retro for you? Where do you have a hard line? What's going on?
Hard line. Well, wow.
Or is it a blurred line? What do you got going on?
I'm not going to make that joke. I was going to make a joke, but that's going to be bad for the podcast. So, I mean, if it's no, I don't want to make. I really want to make that joke, but I'm not going to. One sec. Pause for editing purposes. There you go. So I think you guys are on the right idea when we say retro and nostalgia. They're two different things, but definitely the same room, right? When I think retro, then that's just going to be anything that's, of a past generation of consoles, right? I grew up, I guess, with the Atari and the NES. That's what those systems I kind of know the most. But before that was a television, ColecoVision, right? I never really played much of those, but there still would be retro to me. But when I talk about nostalgia for me is really only going to be those two consoles, the NES and maybe a little of the Atari, because that's when I think back to my childhood playing video games, the memories I have were those two systems. Right, so when I think of nostalgia and retro, they are totally different things to me. So things can be retro just based on, I think, more of a time period, right? It's the older consoles, I think, is retro. But nostalgia, I think, is more of a personal time frame and it's more limited. Like, I've been playing games all my life, but I would only say nostalgia hits me for a certain generation, a certain type of game. And, like, certainly you guys are talking about modern games that are kind of in that pixel retro style. Those, I think, are designed to hit people's nostalgia areas, right? Try and go after those, capture those things. And that's nostalgia. Why, right. And, like, you look at some of them, like Shovel Knight's one of my favorites. Shovel Knight is very much in that old style, trying to capture, your imagination about games you had nostalgia for when you were a kid. But when you look at it technically, even though they have a limited palette and they try to adhere to certain things that, old consoles had to go through, they're not quite the same, right? They're not following the same limitations that Nintendo had, right? There's no technical limitation there that they're trying to follow. So I think the two are very, very different for me. But for me, what is retro? I don't know, man. Like I heard the debate too. Some people telling me PS2 is retro. It's not me, but I can see for somebody who's younger and that's the console they grew up with, or that's the one they first started playing, then okay, then that's retro for them. I mean, I don't know how many years has it been since PS2. It's been 10 years? More than that, I guess, right?
It originally released in 2001, I believe, at least in the West. Maybe 2002? I don't remember exactly, but I mean, it can sign up for the military service now, That's how old PS2 is.
So that's almost 20 years. If it's almost 20 years, then I would say that's probably retro at this point. It makes me feel old.
But then you also have to consider that the PS2 was, I think, still active until 2008, something like that.
Yeah, it had a long lifespan.
It had a longer lifespan than most platforms, I want to say.
It was the same with the PS3 as well. That generation was also quite long-lived. So I think that Sony really pushes for long console generations because of the cost of the hardware.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a factor as well.
Okay, so let me interject here. For me, I kind of qualify PS2 games as retro. I think that's really pushing the limit depending on the PS2 game, which I know sounds a little weird and picky when I'm like, oh yeah, some PS2 games yes, some PS2 games no. But there's also a big difference between first generation PS2 games like Evergrace versus, end of life PS2 games like
Shadow of the Colossus.
Yeah, stuff
Right.
like that. Like it's a big difference. It really is. The PS2 saw such a wide array of games that overcame what they thought were technical limitations for the platform, and they really made that platform shine. I mean, okay, here's a better example. I said Evergrace. Let's compare that to Silent Hill 3. The lighting, the character models, everything in that game is absolutely gorgeous. It blows me away how good that game looked. It doesn't look retro. It doesn't feel retro watching it. It doesn't even look like you watch somebody play it on Twitch or something, and it doesn't look like it's PS2 if you don't know it's PS2.
Okay, well, here's a question for you about that. The characters in that game, did they have flip phones or smartphones? Because that actually, if you think about it, could be a good, delineating factor. If they had smartphones, it's not retro, but if they had flip phones...
I don't think they had phones in that game.
What about the
well, then
Matrix?
clearly it's retro.
The Matrix is retro.
Wait, what was that, Paul?
So the Matrix is retro now. Come on.
It's retro as hell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in the future, but yeah.
Yeah. But you can see how subjective it actually gets.
Okay, well, technically, Rygar then is not.
But to me, I definitely think anything from the generation of PlayStation, Saturn, N64, like that and older, absolutely retro.
Yeah, I think it becomes fuzzy. I think actually what you're saying, Wolf, is a great thing. Like the latter half of the PlayStation 2 run is where the line starts to blur.
Yeah.
I think you have to include PlayStation 2. If you're going to include the first half, you should include the back half. Just because it becomes odd.
Are you going to use it like what's going to draw the line? Is it going to be like a specific title, a specific date, and then when you get into the date, that's when people start saying, oh, this has to be at least 15 years or 20 years or
Yeah,
10
I'm not
years.
exactly X years from, back from today is where it's at. No, I'm not like that.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like a age plus does it feel right for me, which is probably like,
That is horrible.
to some people they're going to be like,
horrible.
that's some bullshit. But
out of context, Wolf. Damn.
Phrasing.
Yes, phrasing. Thank you, Jake. Does it feel
too late.
right? Yeah.
I don't know.
You need a formula because it's like, okay, you want to just use age, it's not going to work. You want to use nostalgia, it's not going to work because, you're going to play another game and get some similar feels compared to something else. So you have to punch in a few things into the calculation.
Yeah, and I have an example from outside of the video game world to sort of clarify how this gets so muddy.
Wait, there's a world outside of video games?
So, I still love 80s music to this day. It's like almost all of it is still my jam. And I'm dating myself. I don't give a rat's ass. I love the stuff from the 80s, be it pop, rock, metal, whatever. That's my decade, right? But, to me, it's 80s music. That's it. It's just that's how I qualify it, is from the decade. It's the way they got creative with the music. So 80s to me is just boom, 80s music. I know exactly what you're talking about. And my little brother and his friends, who are 10 years younger than me, they called it oldies.
What?
Did you punch them?
I was like, oh my God, I feel old. We're 10 years apart, and he and his friends were calling it oldies. Like, that never even crossed my mind.
So, a couple of things here. 80s music, if we're going to go outside of the realm of video games.
Okay, look. So we mentioned you're talking about music, right?
Yes, okay.
I'm thinking of classic rock.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a big fan of Nirvana. I know people don't like them, but whatever. I love Nirvana. For me, the right age, that's one of my favorite bands. Nowadays, they're on the classic rock station. I will never call them classic rock.
No,
They're
I call them
just
alternative.
grunge. Right, but for a lot of people, it's on the classic rock station. They consider it classic rock, right? And I think video games follow the same thing, where some games are going to be called retro for some people, or considered, for those nostalgia reasons. But I just don't see it for myself personally.
And I don't disagree with Jake. I think the music thing becomes a little bit more muddied, but there is a distinct connection there. And where I'm going with this is you have like the 80s kind of like techno synth pop music that you see, or, that you can think of from any of the classic movies, or even just, the pop culture of the 80s, for those of us who were there. But then you have things that are being made nowadays. There's an amazing band out there called Gunship, and they are heavily influenced and oftentimes reference the 80s culture in their music. It's all very popcorn, almost Pac-Man sounding, beep, boop, boop, beep, and arpeggios and stuff. And then you have, like, for example, Stranger Things, where it's made now, but it exists in the 80s. So the things that are made, for example, with that soundtrack, they sound distinctively 80s, but they're not. So, I mean, it's the same thing. You have these people who are the creative force behind video games and music and TV and movies now that are writing love letters back to their childhood. And to me, it's not retro, but it's just that. It's a love letter to that. And so I can still get down with it, but you can't call it 80s music because it's 30 years too late.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. I like that, actually. It's kind of the same thing to get that retro inspired, but in a different way. Like you want to tug on the same kind of heartstrings.
For me, I think the point that I'm making, if I'm making any point, is even these things that are hearkening back to the good old days of the 80s, back when the earth was still cooling. It all, again, for me, comes down to the technical limitations of, what existed back then versus now. You can make a retro style anything now, but you've got better equipment to do it with. And so, unless you want to go, well, I already disagree with that, because you could still go back and use the stuff from the 80s to record new stuff. So you got me by the short ones, guys. I don't know. I don't have a distinct answer for you.
I think it just goes to show how much of you can find different ways to argue with yourself, even if you wanted to.
It really is a tricky topic to 100% define with no wiggle room. I don't know that that's possible, and not just because like every day, what's old is a day older. It's always going to be older than it was, but just because like even in the moment right now, it's hard for me to say, what exactly is and what exactly isn't. And I could probably be convinced on some of the things that I'm against being retro into being retro, and vice versa, in a good discussion about it. So it's a rough one.
Actually, I got a question here. So PC gaming, I struggle with this all the time. It's not a console. PC has, various decades of games. At what point do we cut off PC gaming as being retro?
Oh, I got one. No, man. If it's made by Sierra, it's retro.
Yeah.
Sierra, Interplay.
Yeah.
those old ones.
I mean, Blizzard did a bunch of old games too, and they're still around, kind of, right?
Yeah.
We'll see.
They've fallen from grace. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I struggle with this all the time, where if I want to stream games on Twitch, that generally it's old PC games, but they're not that old. Like, for example, Skyrim is 2011. That's 8 years old, right?
It is. Yet I don't classify that as retro. Like, for me, not even Oblivion. Like, I have to go all the way back to Morrowind to consider Elder Scrolls retro.
Yeah.
So not retro, but it's definitely old. So I always ask Twitch, can I just have an old shit category for PC games that are not quite retro but are still old?
And that's another place where it gets muddied is, when you're on Twitch and you want to play an older game. Like that's the nice thing about the retro category is it lets you play all sorts of old games that nobody's going to be like, I wonder if somebody's playing Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers for the NES right now. Nobody's going to look for that specifically, most of the time. They're going to look at retro streamers if they're looking for somebody playing an old game, and they're going to see, okay, who's playing something that interests me, and let me go check that out.
Yeah. The only time you find someone looking for a game specifically is like speedrunners. So. And
there are definitely older games that I want to stream that people are not going to be looking for. And we're talking like late PS2, maybe in some cases, barely 10 years old. And it's going to be like, well, I feel kind of dirty putting this as retro, but it also kind of qualifies as retro. So Jake makes a good point there. There needs to be another distinction somewhere that isn't just retro. And I think that would benefit the gaming community on the whole to have, for lack of a better term, old shit. You know?
But when we get on this topic, there's one thing, like we say, what is retro? We say this, we say that.
Yeah, what is not retro?
Yeah, and one thing that I want to say gets under my skin, but it really doesn't, because it doesn't bother me that much. But I know, like, some people, it's like pineapple on pizza. You're going to get people arguing black and blue.
You know what really grinds my gears?
Yeah, exactly. But like the pineapple on pizza discussion, for me, I like it. Screw it. If you want to convert that to, like, what is retro, and you say retro is 10 years or older, then I'm like, I will jump on that. Like, like, I will jump on that like someone who hates pineapple says pineapple doesn't belong on pizza. So it's just, I don't know why it is, but I mean, someone was playing a game. It was one of my friends I made on Twitch, and I was like, you supposed to be streaming on retro? Like, did you forget to change your game? And he's like, no. I go by like the 10-year rule. And I was like, the 10-year rule? And this was the first time I heard it. And, anything older than 10 years is retro. And I'm like, that's way too hard to cut off. And I think that's too soon to cut off. So I think the best one, that the rule for me, just if you want to make it a hard age, what Game Squad said, if it's old enough to buy smokes. And I love that one, just because it's just like, I'm going to go blow past the line that may exist or may not exist and just say screw it.
Well, hold on, though. But, okay, in what country? Because there might be some countries out there where you can be 10 years old and go buy smokes.
Well, legally, sure. I mean, in that case, they can go for it. And if they're streaming from that one, impressive.
Well, yeah, I think what we had said at the very top of the show kind of makes the most sense. A 10-year cutoff makes sense if you're 20 years old.
Yeah.
I think maybe retro is just maybe the first half of your life. If you're 30, if the game's older than 15 years. I mean, I'm trying to think now of like formulas that have variables and shit like that. Like what Werewolf is saying, age plus does it feel right?
Yeah.
Let it go. Let it go.
I don't know. I'm starting, you guys have opened a can of worms in my head, because now I'm thinking, what all can I refer to as retro? We've discussed music, but
yeah, I mean, your channel is specifically called the Retro Therapy. Like, you probably have to think about this a lot compared to a lot of us, because you've probably got games you want to play, and you're like, well, can I on the channel? Would people give me crap for that?
Actually, those are kind of what I consider side piece games. It's fun to play, but you don't take it out to dinner. You know what I mean? So, like, I'll play the game, but I'm not going to do it on stream. Okay, the four of us, before we started the podcast, you guys remember, we were playing River City Ransom Underground. So, would we consider that retro? River City Ransom is Underground, brand new. But again, if we were to stream that, I would have somebody busting my balls and saying this is not technically retro. So that is where the waters get murky.
I do think you could probably get away with classifying that as retro, and nobody would really give you issue with it, except for a few people who thumb their nose at that sort of thing.
Assholes.
But that's exactly the point. There will always be a couple people who want to pipe up and say that, and that's fine. I love that people care enough to voice their opinions, but you also got to respect a streamer, not just me, but anybody. You got to be able to respect their choice to not
just
care.
Other people in
it.
general, It's not even a streamer thing, but I mean, this is one of those discussions that I'm sure a lot of people get into a heated discussion about, and it's just not worth it, honestly. Yeah. But it is a discussion on Twitch. I see it all the time, and so I know we're starting to lean this podcast a little bit into that community, probably more than I expected, but it definitely is something that comes up a lot in the chat in various channels. Like, is this retro? Do you think this should be retro? Did you accidentally forget to change your topic? So it gets tricky. For me, my absolute it isn't retro is like this generation of consoles and last generation of consoles. Absolutely 100% cannot be retro yet.
Sure.
And like maybe in the first couple years of a new generation, again, not the last two generations.
Yeah, like when PS5 comes out, You won't be like,
even
oh,
that's
yeah.
getting murkier because the console generations don't often line up. I mean, Microsoft and Xbox are keeping it pretty on par, but Nintendo's just throwing themselves out the window. Like they're basically Stewart from Mad TV. Look what I can do, and everybody watches. You know.
Yeah. Hey Nintendo, what are you making right now? I don't want to say.
Yeah. then all of a sudden he just breaks out a cardboard box and people are just like, oh.
Well, okay. Well, what if we look at it this way? And again, right now, it's not devil's advocate. It's me trying to think, okay, is there a good way that we can contribute to a definitive answer? But if a console is listing games on their, membership services from older consoles, would that, because like to look at the Nintendo Switch, if you pay their subscription, whatever, you can play the NES games and now the Super NES games, but they're not going to put something that they came out with for the Wii U. So if the paid membership service offers a retro section and it's in there, anything in that console is fair game for retro. What do we think on that?
You know what? My simple definition would probably be, if the platform itself, or maybe like the operating system itself, was released over 15 years ago, start from there and then sort of gauge what the game looked like, felt like, things like that from there.
Yeah, like you're not seeing the N64 classic yet,
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, that again goes back to, and to me, Dreamcast is retro, period. And I know it's the same generation as the PS2, but the Dreamcast also crashed and burned into a pile of flames. I loved the system.
Yeah.
I loved a lot of the games for it, but its lifespan was not that long.
Oh yeah, exactly. So I mean, it doesn't have the staying power that the PS2, for argument's sake, did. Almost 10 years.
That's, again, it gets a little messy, but I think the objective starting point is if the platform is over 15 years old for me. And then from there is where I get into subjectivity for my personal preferences.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that may be the best, or again, it's not even best or most concise, but I agree. I think anything younger than 10 years would just be right out of even consideration for me. But maybe around the 15-year mark, I would start saying, oh, that's a tough one, or that's a good point. I don't know. But again, look at our ages, gentlemen.
Yeah, we are all mid-30s, so...
120 years of retro experience.
Oh, yeah.
Technically, we're over 130.
Well, that's not... Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Now, are we all doing math in our head right now?
No,
Okay.
I was letting that sink in a little bit. Like, man, I'm getting old. Shit.
I came to terms with that when I lost my hair.
And I'll say it this way again, because again, I'm trying to reframe things to try to look at it from different perspectives. And I'm sure that we have a bunch of these people out there listening today thinking this and yelling at us saying it's like jazz. When you see it, you know it. So if you look at something and it doesn't just immediately say retro, it's probably not retro.
I just gave a definition and now I'm going to walk it back because earlier we were talking about Savage and Shovel Knight, and I would absolutely say those are retro. And I think it also comes down to, if it's a newer game, is it trying to emulate an older era? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because Battle Kid, I think, for the NES is not old. It's less than 10 years old, I'm pretty sure. But I would absolutely qualify that as retro because it's made for the NES. It's stuck with those same technical limitations because it's an NES game.
Yeah, literally an NES cart.
Again, like I guess you gotta actually count what era of gaming is it trying to emulate or represent.
1970s body hair, we'll say it that way. Is that considered retro? Asking for a friend.
I don't know what that means.
He can't grow facial hair, so I don't even worry about it. He can't even grow a mustache, so.
They just need to make Rogaine for a face. That's all I'm saying.
That's not true. I've seen him with that Joe Dirt mustache.
It's Joe Dirte.
Yeah, it's French.
I love this though, and I love that we all can agree on certain aspects of things, but we all kind of start to not flake off, but like differentiate. I don't know. This is such a good and meaningful conversation because we all have different thoughts, but in the end, we can all recognize it doesn't matter because we all love what we love. And I think that's, anyway, not to sound too weird, but
I think it's always going to be more subjective than objective. It's just an inevitability when it comes to what fits the bill when it comes to that. But I've got my objective stance, and even that I can't stick with, you know?
Well, let me ask you a question. and this just popped in my mind. What about franchises that are 20 to 30 years old? For example, take The Price is Right, or take The Simpsons. At what point in the past 30 years did The Simpsons switch off from retro to current? Because it's a retro series from the 80s, it's still happening to be aired today without stopping and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then you can look at stuff like Dragon Warrior and Dragon Quest. Is that what they're called? Dragon Quest?
Well, those games are great because the modern Dragon Quest, I played a little bit of it. It's full of Easter eggs and sound cues from the earlier games. Dragon Quest Builders is the same thing.
Even the newest release of Dragon Quest XI, doesn't it have a 16-bit mode or something?
Oh, on the Switch, yeah, it does. The throwback to the
Yeah.
Super Nintendo versions.
If I'm to understand what was conveyed to me between trailers and articles correctly, you can play the entire game that way? That's pretty badass.
Yeah, you can swap back and forth anytime you want.
I mean, it is not a retro game, but then you throw that on, and it very much becomes one.
Yeah, can we get a 16-bit Mario Odyssey?
Nice.
Or Mario Odyssey?
Well, so that's why I love Odyssey so much, is because Odyssey has those 8-bit sections.
Yeah.
And those are just great throwbacks. That's why I say, again, this retro and nostalgia have to be two different things, right?
I agree.
The age of systems and whatnot is retro, but nostalgia is a very specific period or a specific thing that you can emulate with modern takes on it.
Okay, I got a question for all of you guys now, because I don't know where I stand on this one, but GP streamed this game, and he asked me about it, and I was like, yeah, go for it. But at the same time, I was kind of like, what do you think about Final Fantasy X being retro?
Ew.
Because it's old. It's old enough. It's definitely old enough.
Oh, no.
But I think it's aged so well that it almost still, it feels newer. That's just to me.
I kind of qualify it, honestly.
As retro or?
As retro. I qualify Final Fantasy X.
It was definitely on the cusp of being too new to really fit in with, forgive me for saying the branding of the retro therapy, but it was such a fun and interesting game. I certainly didn't mind it. There were no shortage of people saying, oh, this isn't retro, but it was not so much a complaint as just, I think people wanted to say something. And of course, that's perfectly fine, but nobody was like, you need to quit playing this on this channel. Everybody was just like, you know, it definitely started that conversation, Pulse. And that is a big part of the reason you are my go-to guy for questions like that, because I would have just, you know, probably for fear of that, I wouldn't have done it, but I'm glad I did.
Here's something to consider. With Final Fantasy X, it is over 18 years old.
Wow. Is it?
It is.
It may be retro, but 18 years doesn't change it from being a flaming pile of hot garbage. That game is terrible.
He said it.
So bad.
There it is. See, I liked 10.
Ugh.
I like 10. I do. It's the last one I enjoyed.
I like that
But-
one chick from 10. That was cool.
Kamari is a guy.
What? But I have all those posters.
You talking about Kuja?
Also a guy.
Also from 9, not 10.
Right,
I
yeah,
can never
like-
remember. What was his name? Seymour?
Maester Seymour. Yeah. I had a retro poster from a Nintendo Power, and I had Orchid from Killer Instinct. I remember that because it was like, you know, the centerfold posters that they give you, but it was a centerfold of her, and I thought that was that was like, yeah, I think I'm entering puberty now because this is awesome.
Okay. Joke for after the show. Okay, well, yeah, so here's a question. Again, just that when the Wii and the Wii U were out, there were a couple different games that were essentially remixes of the old ones, kind of a precursor to Retro Achievements. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Was this NES Remix where it was taking bite size of games and doing like weird mini things with it?
Weird challenges, yeah. So retro games done in new ways, still retro, right? Even though the game was on a Wii disc, still retro.
It was challenge bites of old NES games, though. Like,
But they changed it up quite a bit, though. They added stuff to them.
that's true.
And at this point, we're taking on things specifically one game at a time, and I understand it's completely absurd, but
Super muddy at that point,
yeah.
Well, like things like Mario Maker, right? I love Mario Maker. And that's definitely targeting the nostalgia part of people's brains, right? But it's not necessarily retro. Hell, the physics are even different. It's even a different game. It may look like the old Mario games, but it's nothing. It doesn't play.
Oh, yeah.
Game.
Mario, what is it? Super Mario Brothers 1? They had to just do the best they could to make the physics match as close as they could, and they still didn't get it 100% or something.
So then, going off of what you just said, if I'm understanding it right, we can no longer qualify games like Savage to be retro, because what you said is it looks like it, but it's not it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why I'm saying retro, nostalgia are two very different things. Like they're related, but I think they are different. Savage, nostalgia for sure, but I don't think it's retro.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I tend to agree with Sick Jake on that.
Yeah, I suppose so, because it's definitely, like, you can look at an NES game and be like, well, that doesn't hit any nostalgia buttons, but that is definitely retro.
Yeah.
All right, well.
Yeah. No, this is
and
is
once
great.
again, my perspective has changed.
Well, but never before have we had
Son
an
of a bitch.
episode where we've spent, a week or two thinking about the subject and getting ready for it, and then here we are recording the show, and there are gaps where we're all soul searching during the conversation. I love that. Like, that's what I appreciate and makes this one so unique. Is typically we all have our thoughts and opinions and we're prepared. Well, we're prepared today, but we're challenging each other enough that at certain points we're all stopping and thinking like, well, now I have to change my worldview because that was a good point. It's brilliant. It's a great one.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to find anything 100% on this. I think we're going to just keep talking ourselves in circles and changing our perspectives. I don't know.
I don't think Jake's going to change his perspective on Final Fantasy X, though. So
No, I mean, there's two perspectives. There's the right one and there's the wrong one. I mean, that's okay. The game is bad. I'm sorry. I've tried playing that game, and now that I realize it's 18 years old, it blows my mind because I've tried that several times throughout the last almost 2 decades, and it's been bad each time. But I'll give you this. It's pretty looking, and because it does look so nice, I never crossed my mind that would be considered a retro game. Not at all.
yeah, and that's why I brought it up, just for the fact that I know how old it is, and
Yeah.
But I mean, that game is it's special for multiple reasons. For that, I think the graphics and I don't know what it's done for the series. I guess I don't know. Maybe it's just the graphics, but either way, it's just aged differently than most PlayStation 2 games, in my opinion.
But there is somebody out there listening right now whose childhood video game experience was defined by Final Fantasy X. So to them, it is absolutely retro.
Yeah.
This is
So-
true.
Now I feel guilty. Thanks, GP.
No, I mean, retro can still be hot garbage.
I mean, look at Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That's retro. It's also hot garbage. So
Yeah.
you're safe. You're safe.
Okay.
Talking about the game or the
You
book? The book was
you don't
awesome.
have to. Oh no, there's a difference between other media, but the NES game.
Yeah, that.
Oh,
Can we get a hot garbage for Jekyll and Hyde?
I'm so sorry.
oh my god.
That's
amazing.
that's my last one. I'm so sorry I've done that so much to you tonight, Jake. I just want you to know how much joy you've brought me.
I just don't understand how you found that. We just hitting buttons randomly in your phone, and you're like, oh, this is like, how'd you even? I'm gonna listen to Sick Jake talk slow for the next 20 minutes.
Actually, no, just real quick, I'll tell you the story. I was listening to the episode today, and I don't like the sound of my own voice, which may be a shock to a lot of you because I like to talk all the time. So I found out I could fast forward through that by hitting like the 2 times speed. Well, so then after I was done talking, I hit the button again thinking it would go to 1 times speed, and it went to half. And then there was Sick Jake, and I'm like, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard.
Oh man.
But no, again, Sick Jake, thank you for being cool with me using that
No,
so much.
it's fine.
It's been
That's
the
my
highlight of my
ringtone.
day. That's my new ringtone.
Just your text message, Atari.
On your flip phone, your ringtone says technical limitations is apt as fuck. So it's good.
Yeah, it is.
But anyway, yeah, I agree. I think Werewolf is right. We're going to talk ourselves into circles and constantly be changing our views. I think the closest thing I've come to tonight to just thinking this is right was that comment about it's kind of like jazz. You know, when you hear it, you know it, and that's it. You know, if you have to ask, you'll never know. I think for everybody, like you said, retro is going to be a little bit different. So when you see it, you know it. Unless it's Pink Floyd shirts.
Look at how many times my opinion changed during this episode recording.
Yeah.
I mean, shit, it doesn't get a whole lot more fluid than that. I'm definitely interested into seeing what our listeners also consider as retro. I'd like to know and see where everybody stands. Like it's an interesting subject to pick people's brains about.
Yeah, and I'm sure,
At least to me.
like the differences in age, like we're all pretty much within a few years of each other too. So I mean, once you get past like 3 or 4 years, I find that you notice a big difference. So I mean, someone who's 4 years older than me versus 4 years younger, and I'm stuck in the middle. There's a big difference between that person and this person. But in comparing me to them, I can see more similarities. So if somebody who's listening in and wanted to weigh in on it and bring up some, ideas and little things that we never mentioned today, by all means, that's what our Discord is for.
Yeah. Pipe up. Tell us why we're wrong and tell us what we didn't think of.
Yeah, I'm sure we missed all sorts of perspectives on this. And, when you guys bring it up, we're going to be like, oh, yeah, we're dumb.
But I want that. I want there to be somebody who says this is the exact right answer or here's the formula. I never thought to put it in a formula until you said that word.
If somebody out there has like that beautiful mind equation that can get us to what's retro, please share it. I am all over for that.
I bet Billboard would be the one to come up with it.
Yeah.
The creator of Savage.
Creator. So yeah, we could be like the teachers in, was it Good Will Hunting? And someone can be our Good Will Hunting. Solve the thing on the chalkboard, and then we'll be like, what the
Who did it?
Yeah. Turned out to be that janitor that doesn't even play video games. It's like, what the fuck, man?
Well, I don't know if Good Will Hunting is retro enough of a definition. We need to say Rain Man.
Fair.
GP has a point there. As long as it's not dealing in money, we're fine.
Yeah.
Shit, yeah, right, yeah.
I do think that I think the gaming community probably could use a bit more of a formalized era definition than just retro or not. Much like comic books, there's the golden age of comics, the silver age of comics, the platinum age. And when comic book readers talk about those ages, they know exactly what they are. Like they know the years and who was making comics at the time and what comics were in print. And if they don't, they can at least easily discover that because they know the era in general. And even I don't know
who distinguished those? Decided like the golden age, silver age, all that.
It all depends
for comics.
For example, there's one point, with the reset in like DC, Superman punched through reality. So if we can get Mario to do that, that would really set some boundaries for it.
Yeah. Nintendo, get on that.
Or, Donkey Kong if you want to, yeah.
I think this is where we're going to call this episode because as we've said over and over again already, we're not going to come up with a strict definition for this. But we'd like to know you guys' input, so please share that with us. And we're going to go ahead and close out.
I can't wait to hear that in slow motion. Use guys as...
That'll be fun. All right, so I have been this week's host, barely, Werewolf. You can find me on Twitter or Twitch, WAREWULFF. I have been joined by Pulse109.
Yellow. You can find me here. This is my thing, so welcome.
Sick Jake.
And I'm Sick Jake. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter at SICJAKE. Slow that one down, you asshole.
Can't lie, I almost called you Sick Peach because of what you got in your in the Discord right now. And Guy Prime of the Retro Therapy.
Yeah, this is Guy Prime Retro Therapy. Thank you.
Professional.
Oh, sorry. No, yeah, you can find me on Twitch at the Retro Therapy, or you can search the Retro Therapy on Instagram, YouTube, any of those places, and probably find me also.
Alrighty. Well, we hope you all have a good one. This has been Press B to Cancel.
Special thanks for music go to Arthur the Ancient, found on SoundCloud, or The Last Ancient on YouTube. For more episodes, please visit our website, pressbtocancel.com. As well, feel free to like or subscribe at Apple iTunes, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else you like to listen to your favorite shows. As always, thank you. This has been
Press B to cancel.
Press B to